I'm not really a fan of the term self-sabotage because that feels a bit heavy and it kind of implies that something's wrong with you. However, it is true that as human beings, we often engage in behaviours that hold ourselves back. And this absolutely applies to our businesses as well. Most of the time, these behaviours are fundamentally about trying to protect ourselves from a perceived threat. But the problem is that this so-called protection often ends up working against us. This is why it can be super useful to be aware of the tendencies that you may have towards so-called self-sabotage, because once you recognize them, you can make a conscious decision to change them. So here are the top 10 most common self-sabotages that I see in online business owners. And if any of these resonate with you, I'd love to hear how you deal with them. My name's Rachel Roberts and I help ELT, ESL and language teaching freelancers like yourself optimize your business model, your marketing and your mindset so that you can earn more and work less. A common self-sabotage that I see is the belief that there is a limit on what you can charge for your services, and very often that this limit is pretty low. Maybe you've checked a few websites or spoken to people locally about what they think the going rate is. But by assuming that you can't charge more than that, you're creating a glass ceiling for yourself, which is very often completely unnecessary. I recently spoke to a client who told me that she felt she was charging a lot per hour for her services. But when I spoke to her, it was about half of what I know other clients in her field and in her area are charging. So what's the solution if you're not sure how much you actually can charge? First of all, of course, it's about your marketing and about getting the value of what you do across so that people can see why they should pay more for your services than for a generic language teaching service that doesn't have any standout elements. Beyond that, just try it. Try putting your prices up and see what happens. You don't necessarily have to announce a big price increase everywhere. Start small and test out the higher pricing with a few clients. As one of my group program participants recently found out, when she decided to plunge in and offer her new, much higher price program before it was even fully ready, sometimes people will just accept the higher price without hesitation, and that can then build confidence for you to do it again and again. The second sabotage I'm going to talk about is also based on making assumptions. In this case, telling yourself that obviously no one wants your offer, when actually the fact is that no one really knows about your offer, and therefore they haven't been able to make that decision one way or the other. You might feel that you've talked about it plenty, but the truth is, it is incredibly hard to over-communicate about these things, particularly on social media, where only a very small percentage of your followers, never mind those who don't yet follow you, will see any one post. Whenever I do a big launch and I really feel that I've overdone all of the posts and emails, I can guarantee you that there will always be somebody who comes to me after the deadline has passed and says that they didn't see anything about it until now. So before you tell yourself that this isn't going to work, that nobody wants this offer, really give it a good try and put that offer out there with confidence and with consistency. Self-sabotage number 3 is bargaining yourself down too quickly. Have you ever said your price and then immediately followed it up with, "But I can offer you a discount"? Often we jump into the silence and we undercut ourselves before giving people a chance to respond. You need to have faith in the value of what you offer, because if you don't, how can anybody else? Give people time to think and don't be afraid of the silence. Just as with teaching, you get the best results and the best responses when you give people time to think. That moment of silence can really be your friend. Number 4 is a really common one, assuming that something cheaper will be easier to sell. Again, this is very often about losing your nerve and thinking that perhaps if instead of offering a 3-month program, which in fact you know is the amount of time that your clients need to get the results that you're promising, it will be easier to sell maybe a 4-week program. But this is not necessarily the case at all, because whether somebody buys something or not depends upon whether they fully understand how it's going to help them and why it's right for them, and whether they trust you to deliver that result for them. And the length of it, and even the price to a very large degree, comes underneath building that trust. And when you sell a lower price service, then you have to sell more of them and sell them more frequently. And that's a lot more work. So instead of focusing on trying to sell something cheap, focus on offering something of high value that really meets your customers' needs. And you might well find that it's just as easy to sell that higher priced item as it is a lower one. Number 5 is waiting until something is absolutely perfect and finished before you let it out into the world. But spending too much time perfecting and polishing your offer before you even test it with customers is a sabotage, because you may well find when you actually get to try this out with your clients that it isn't exactly what they want or need, and then you've wasted all of that time. You don't need to have everything polished and perfect and in place. Start with what's known as a minimum viable product. Test it, gather feedback, and take it from there. And this is very much what I help my clients do on my 6-month group program. It means that we can get your offer out there much sooner, get you earning some money, plus you'll get the feedback and the testimonials that will then help you to launch the fuller, more complete version of your program later on. Self-sabotage number 6 is filling your time with less important tasks. Very often those tasks which are actually less important feel easier and less threatening. It's usually the things where we have to put ourselves out there a bit more that we tend to avoid, but which actually are the things which we should be focusing on. So you'll find that many people spend a lot of time on marketing and not enough time on selling, for example. If you're not sure which tasks you should be prioritizing, start by identifying what actually brings in the revenue and what takes up most of your time. And if those two things are not in alignment, then that's your starting point in terms of prioritizing. Number 7, underselling. Underselling is something that often happens because people are worried, understandably, about overselling. We feel uncomfortable about making big promises, particularly when we know as a language educator that the progress that our clients make is not entirely in our hands at all. It's also in their hands. How much work are they going to put into it? We don't want to oversell ourselves and our offer and risk possibly under-delivering. But the problem is that we often go far too far in the other direction, underselling our services to the point where people don't really trust that we know what we're doing. It's absolutely vital that you have confidence in your offer and that you can communicate that clearly. Go back to the clients that you've worked with before. Look at the feedback they've given you, hopefully the testimonials that they've given you, and make sure that you communicate that confidence to the clients who are thinking about working with you. They need to trust you in order to take that step, and you need to give them some evidence of why they should. Number 8 is another procrastination-based self-sabotage, and it's what's often referred to in English as clearing the decks before starting the big tasks. In other words, feeling that it's a good idea to get all those small little bitty jobs out of the way, and then we can get on with the bigger task. However, what often happens, it certainly happens to me, is that most of the day goes in dealing with these little bitty, relatively unimportant tasks, such as responding to emails, for example. And then, oh, whoops, it's too late, or I'm too tired to start on the bigger, more important task. It's a way of avoiding anything that we find more threatening or that makes us feel a little bit uneasy. So switch things around and instead start the day with that most important task, otherwise known as eating the frog. Doing the thing that you really don't want to do first thing and getting it out of the way. That's when your brain is freshest, and it also means that you're much more likely to actually do that task that you're avoiding. And once you've done that, then you can tackle the easier, more routine tasks. Number 9, not actually setting aside time to plan and ideate about your business. Most of the time, we're so busy with dealing with the day-to-day that we don't actually give ourselves time to stop and think about whether what we're doing is actually working, whether it's what we really want to be doing, what it is that we would really like to change in our business. And it's really important, I think, if we're going to make those kinds of things happen, that we set aside time to do that on a regular basis. So you might have a certain time every week when you set aside this kind of time, or you might set aside a whole day on a less regular basis, or both. But it's really important that you see this time for planning and coming up with ideas as actually being a priority in your business. Otherwise, you're just going to stay stuck doing the same old things again and again. Finally, number 10, and perhaps the biggest of the self-sabotages, is believing that you need to feel confident about doing something before you do it. The truth is that feeling wobbly about trying something new is entirely normal. You're never going to feel super confident when you're stepping into new territory, and that's absolutely fine. Instead, it's about accepting that a certain amount of discomfort is part of the process and just take action anyway. It's not about getting that little voice in your head that says, ooh, you're not going to be able to do this. It's not about getting that voice to shut up and go away, because most people never manage to do that. But it is about just turning down the volume on that voice, going, okay, maybe you're right, maybe I can't do it, but I'm going to try anyway. And that's what really helps us to move the needle forward in our business. If any of these top 10 sabotages really resonate with you, remember that this is not about beating yourself up for your bad habits. It's just human nature to create ways of trying to keep ourselves safe from perceived risk. The first step to break free from these often unhelpful habits is always awareness. Once you spot what your favorites are, then you can start to take small intentional steps towards changing them. Let me know in the comments what your favorites are and any tips that you have to catch yourself when you're doing these things, or ways that you found of overcoming them and making a different choice. And check out in the description my new self-study course, The Confident Freelancer Roadmap, which is full of other tips about mindset, as well as practical strategies and information about setting up and running your freelance language teaching business.